Welcome back. The decay of the Johannesburg CBD's administrative infrastructure has moved from a chronic concern to a national emergency. Following the high-profile abandonment of the Metro Centre and a series of fatal structural failures, a massive accountability drive is now underway, led by the National Department of Public Works and Infrastructure, alongside civil society oversight. Let's unpack this with chairperson of the Right to Justice, Siphesihle, Jele, as well as the spokesperson of the Gauteng Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs in the Infrastructure Development Department, Theo Nkonki. And I'd like to start with you, Theo Nkonki. Thank you so much for your time, firstly, and a very good evening to you. This, of course, is no longer just a crisis. It's become a national emergency. How does your department allow this to happen?
No, thank you so much, and good evening to you, Masa, and the viewers. I think one must just put this into context. One, we own a number of buildings, I think about 19 buildings in the CBD, and these buildings are there, or they were acquired as part of a broader strategy to ensure that government makes the city of Johannesburg CBD its seat of power. So that would have started in the 90s, late 90s, until 2003. Now, the view was that we want to, while there was a lot that was happening between the late 80s and the early 90s, or the late 90s, when, you know, there was a shift between the old economy, which was really established on the gold rush, as we know it. So the provincial government, when it was set up, there was a deliberate decision to say, we need to set it up in the CBD of Johannesburg so that it becomes an anchor in the context of what was happening in terms of people leaving the CBD. And we are sticking to that particular strategy. Now, what you are looking at in the CBD, especially in the context of the government precincts that you see in the CBD, is that there are a number of buildings that I said, it's 19 buildings that we have. And I know there's been a bit of fracas about, you know, whether these are well maintained or not. And I think as we go on with the conversation, you will learn that due to the state of the buildings when they were acquired by the state, and the resources and the limitations when it comes to resources in terms of maintaining those buildings and keeping them to modern occupational health standards, there was a bit of a shortfall there. And we are upfront to say that.
I need to come in there. That is quite the understatement when you call it a bit of a shortfall. Anyone who has been to Johannesburg City Centre will tell you that it being the seat of power is not working. As a provincial government, you are leasing buildings, you own buildings that you aren't using and are renting buildings rather, spending a whole lot of money. So I get the history behind it, and history is important, but let's stick to now. Why is it that your department has let this situation go on for this long? And more importantly, why are you leasing buildings when you have buildings that you own and aren't using effectively, such as the Metro Centre?
No, absolutely. So Masa, I just wanted to explain that, give a bit of background, but explain this very important balance that we have to strike as the Department of Infrastructure Development in the province. One, the state of the buildings that we acquired back in the days were never going to be in a good state for them to pass the muster of the now occupational health and safety rules. So you have seen quite a number of departments now being moved to leased buildings. And there's a proper rationale for that. And that rationale is that while we continue to, you know, look for the money to upgrade the infrastructure that we have, obviously we have a difficulty in that we can't then tell every civil servant who works in the CBD to home while we solve that problem. So what we've done, we've decided to walk and chew at the same time. So we've said that while we then bring those buildings to a standard that is acceptable according to the new standards, we are going to lease certain buildings so that service delivery continues. So those head offices that we've had to lease out space for them It was deliberately to deal with the fact that we couldn't interrupt service delivery, but we should also look at other ways of financing what is a huge shortfall in terms of maintenance of those buildings. These buildings are more than 50 years old. So that's a huge challenge. To bring it to life, it will take quite an investment. What we've done, and I want to draw you to what the Premier announced during the beginning of the seventh administration, which was the shift of the Gauteng Infrastructure Financing Agency from Treasury, Gauteng Provincial Treasury, to the Department of Infrastructure Development. That was a deliberate move to ensure that we bring some capacity, because we know that the fiscus is not enough for us to bring these buildings back to life as we would want to.
Speaking of the fiscus, Theo, it's not just, sorry, Theo, I've given you enough time, and we also have another guest as well. I'd like you to pause there, because I think you've spoken quite a bit there. But speaking of the fiscus and the Premier as well, it was last year already in April where he said there'll be a probe into 34 million rand being spent monthly on leases. But this is where I want to bring in Siphesihle Jele, who's the chairperson of the Right to Justice. Siphesihle, you've just heard what Mr. Theo Nkonki has to say. What's your response?
No, I think greetings to you and the viewers at home. I think one of the striking or polling can't strike a balance. We're in agreement that a government cannot properties. Some of them are in a very bad state, but there should be a balance and a political will. So ours as a civil rights movement organization is that there must be a political will to make sure that government properties are utilized for what they must be utilized for. But in a case whereby they should be able to strike a balance and be able to lease out, there should be that will, and there should be balance between the different demographics represented in the business sector. So ours is that there might be challenges, but there seems to be no political will. And I think at some point there's no strategy as to how can they be able to deliver in this regard, because you will have thousands and thousands of government properties in all departments, in all levels of spheres of government, from local, provincial, and national. But they are not utilized for what they must be utilized for, in order for them to be able to save on the fiscal budget and be able to redirect the monies to the services, to servicing the people of South Africa. But the other issue also is that maybe the oversight from their side is selective, because in areas where they must, the benefits or the building, the listers must benefit Black business people, there's always problems. But where white people or white business people benefit, they are always smoothly benefiting without any issues. So there is no will from government from what we were viewed, and we think that their socks and be innovative enough to be able to utilize the buildings and balance the check with.
Unfortunately, it seems that his connection is not so great. Theo, I hope I still have you on the line. I hope you could hear most of what Siphesihle was talking about, and talking about selective oversight as well. What's your response?
No, I think there we just need to assist each other and just clarify certain issues. In terms of oversight, I can vouch for the fact that our department, for the 19 buildings that we own in the CBD, and Masa, I heard you speaking about certain buildings that don't necessarily belong to the provincial government. There are buildings that belong to the city of Johannesburg within the CBD and Braamfontein. I'm not talking about those ones. I'm talking about the 19 that we own. We know the condition of those buildings. Some of them, we are bringing them up because their OHS, or occupational health and safety challenges, were those that we could afford, using the fiscus, to just bring them up and rectify those problems. 45 Fox Street, for instance, is one of those buildings. Now, the question of striking the balance between maintaining the buildings and the fact that the fiscus obviously has been limited over the years. Nobody thinks that is a secret. So you have to balance the fact that the fiscus cannot afford for us to bring these buildings as a precinct, because the new model that we want to use in the CBD, and that is why it was so important for us to have GIFA, or the Gauteng Infrastructure Financing Agency, in the fold. They are there as specialists in blended funding. So what we want to do with these assets is to take them to the market and see if we can't use a public-private partnership model to then bring investors into the CBD, so that then we deal with the entire precinct. We don't want to deal with one building at a time, because I think that will then defeat the purpose of the whole strategy. The strategy is that we must then bring the whole precinct up together, but we must understand what is in that, what capacity and what opportunity is sitting in that CBD. And that is why we've brought the specialists in GIFA to help us with that. And you know that the Premier of the province made an announcement that the Development Bank of Southern Africa will partner with us, making sure that we do exactly what I've just mentioned. So it is not true that we are sitting back and just watching that precinct fall apart. That is not true, because it is in our interest to ensure that we not only crowd in, downstream sort of industries like retail and other sectors through bringing government officials into that CBD, so that the sheer number of government officials who work in that CBD, in that precinct, are enough for us then to start working towards building a real economy around the CBD of Johannesburg. So bringing service delivery, we are not isolating it as a standalone, but also bringing up those buildings to a proper condition. We are not isolating it. We are looking at all those things and the challenges in the fiscus to make sure that we do what we need to do to make sure that we become an anchor tenant in the CBD, and our anchorship then brings other industries or other opportunities for different industries in the CBD.
Just running out of time, but Siphesihle, I believe you are back with us. Just briefly, as you're concluding marks as well, if you could just let us know about this conduction of an oversight visit to several of these government-leased buildings by NGOs, and how we've gotten to this point where NGOs have to now play this watchdog role.
Thank you very much again. One of the biggest problems that government has been citing as an issue is that NGOs have been a barrier of them when they try to take over on the hijacked buildings. So we've said that as proactive and progressive NGOs, we must also come to the flag and be able to assist government. But the issue is not only that there's been a pushback from civil movements, but also there's no way. What we've seen is that there's no cooperation from the different spheres. For example, in Johannesburg, you would have had a lot of disinvestments from the banks and most international companies who were based or housed in the city center here in Johannesburg. We've had interactions with FNB, ABSA, and Standard Bank, who are complaining that the levels of crime, the levels of debt, and the depopulation of the infrastructure, the levels are so bad that they are thinking of moving out of the city center. Mind you, the city center is built to house all these multinational companies and the scores of people who are coming in as the business, as the central business district. But there's no appetite from government on fixing their problems and challenges that they're faced with. There are no street lights, so those who knock off late at night cannot be able to go freely to the nearest taxi ranks. Those who drive complain about possibilities of hijacks. There's debt everywhere. The local government is not picking up through Pick It Up the debt that is all over in the city center. So there's a multitude of issues, but it will seem that government is only focused on only providing business for those that they want to provide business to. But the state is so bad that in some areas you cannot have people coming into work on a day-to-day basis. So we've had also black business people complaining that the preference in this area of business is given to other minority groups, and they are not benefiting.
I'm sure Theo would have a lot to say in response, but unfortunately we have run out of time. Thank you so much to you both, gentlemen. for joining us for this conversation. That was, of course, the chairperson of the Right to Justice, Siphesihle Jele, as well as the spokesperson in the Gauteng Department of Infrastructure, Theo Nkonki.